Hi, travelers. Welcome to another TGN Live event where the stethoscope meets the suitcase. And every event is a journey into the heart of travel healthcare. I'm your host, Rachel Altum, the online community manager for the Gypsy Nurse. And today we're talking about communicating clinical concerns with evidence-based tools. And if we've learned anything, communication is key. And there's no one better to discuss this than Nomad's very own Vice President of Clinical Excellence, Valerie Gale. But before we get started, let's take a moment and see how the Gypsy Nurse can help you along your journey. TGN is a one-stop shop resource for travel healthcare workers. You can plan your next assignment with our downloadable travel nurse guide, find your next assignment with our job board, find a place to stay from our housing partner, Finish Finder, and there is so much more that you can unlock on the gypsynurse.com by becoming a registered member. From insightful interviews with industry experts to in-depth discussions on healthcare trends, our platform is a valuable resource for both seasoned professionals and those considering a career on the move. You can listen to this session and others on demand on the gypsynurse.com. Not only are we the largest online community, but we are also hold the largest in-person travel healthcare conference in Las Vegas every year. You can meet up with other travelers and your recruiters, get your CEs at the greatest price, learn more about the travel healthcare world, and dance the night away at our infamous after party September 22nd through the 25th, 2024. You do not want to miss out on this. It's so much fun. You get to see all your friends and meet all kinds of new people. So super early bird tickets are now on sale for $379 until the end of the year. So you don't want to miss out on this great price. It's the lowest price of the year. Prices will be going up next year. So go over to travcon.org to get your tickets and to learn more. So now let's get ready for an engaging discussion that will not only inspire you, but also have you walking into your next shift feeling confident and prepared. Please welcome Valerie Gale, Vice President of Clinical Excellence at Nomad, and Steve Curtin, the CEO of the Gypsy Nurse, as they will be discussing the tools and communication tactics you can use that will help you and keep your patients safe. So let me go ahead and bring both of them on. Hello. Thank you guys so much for joining us. It's exciting to see
Rachel.
both of you here.
Hi, Rachel. Hi, Valerie.
Hi.
Well, I'll let
Nice
you
to
guys
see you again.
Yes, thank you for taking the time to join us, particularly as we move into the holiday season. I know it's busy for a lot of people, so thank you very much for taking the time to join us. And it's a very important discussion and looking forward to your perspectives.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think even during the holidays, it can be an even more important discussion. So I'm happy that we get the chance to wrap up the year like this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Valerie, let's just jump right in. We've got a number of questions for you, and obviously people are welcome to chat in questions and ask questions as they wish. But, first of all, I'd just like to have you tell our community a little bit about yourself, about your background, your nursing journey, your journey in healthcare. Love to hear more about you and your background.
Sure. Thanks again, Steve. I appreciate it. So I am a nurse by profession, of course, and almost, I guess, well, not almost, now it is 30 years. So I remember there being a time I never thought I'd be able to say I had done anything for 30 years, but nursing it is. So, and actually started my nursing career being recruited by a healthcare travel company. I was recruited from Canada to the US almost 30 years ago. And I came on a year-long contract. So back in the days when we had to submit all of our paperwork by mail, nothing was done via email. So you can imagine the length of that
remember
process.
those days, Valerie. I remember those days of hard copy mail. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, just sort of crossing your fingers. I don't even think we could track our packages back then,
Yeah.
but it was definitely an interesting time. And so it's been really exciting to actually see my nursing career come full circle. For the last 6 years now, have had the opportunity to work in healthcare staffing. And prior to that, after I had exited from the bedside, which was about 6-7 years into my career, I took on more progressive leadership roles and moved into patient safety, performance improvement, infection prevention, those types of roles to really challenge not only just hospitals, but large health systems across the state of Texas to elevate standards of care and clinical practice. And so that's really my my nursing experience in a nutshell. I was able to sort of cram into those 6-7 years experience all the way from the ER to home health and hospice, and then into pediatrics. I'm really grateful for the years I was able to spend at the bedside. And I think having that clinical experience and knowing and walking in the shoes of nurses that are at the bedside today gives me a bit of a unique perspective and can offer some support. I think too, and I know we're going to get into this together, is the tools we'll talk about today are things that I didn't necessarily have at my disposal as a young nurse in my career. And it wasn't until I got into doing work in patient safety and performance improvement for so many years that we really saw how much more important those tools became to ensure we had a safe operating healthcare system. So,
Valerie, what drove you into being interested in terms of the clinical side and obviously the being concerned about nurses and being supportive of nurses at the bedside? What was it that kind of brought you into that part of your role?
I think, I had always wanted to be a nurse myself, which is interesting. I don't, my parents are not in the healthcare profession. I had one nurse on each side of my family, one aunt on my dad's side, one aunt on my mom's side. So not a lot of healthcare influence, but from the time I was just young, I knew I wanted to take care of people, take care of patients. And I think that journey at the bedside, as I began to work and move through my career, I began precepting and having assignments on the floor like that charge RN. And anytime I was in those positions, I felt a different level of accountability and responsibility for all of the patients. Whereas if I was coming into work and I, as staff nurse at the bedside, I could only really influence the care of a smaller group of patients, 6, 8, 10, depending on what unit I was on. And so I think pursuing opportunities that gave me a chance to have a larger impact, that would implement different policies and protocol changes, and even some of these communication things we're talking about today, that's always really been at the heart of every career decision that I've made, is where can I go and move through the system and have the biggest potential impact on patients. As you can imagine, working in healthcare staffing then during COVID, saw that dream really become a reality. I came from a large healthcare staffing company before joining Nomad, and we were placing thousands of clinicians a week at the bedside. And so watching that really come to fruition and knowing that the work we were doing was so purposeful and meaningful has really been an honor for me over the course of my career.
Well, I can tell you're very passionate about what you do, and it's been quite a journey, I'm sure, over 30 years. You mentioned earlier in the conversation about some of the tools, and how now there are many more evidence-based tools that can be used than there were, say, just even a few years ago. Can you talk a little bit about those tools and how they become critical in communication?
Sure. I think patient safety has been, I remember probably 10, 12, maybe even 15 years ago. Now I don't want to admit that. So let's go with 10 or 12. But I recall when patient safety really began to make a name for itself in the healthcare industry. We started talking about things like, we started marking surgical sites for patients, and we started engaging the patient in the check just before surgery and things like that. And then we started talking about how to better work with your colleagues and between physicians and nurses, and break down walls and start really considering each other to be part of the team. And so, I think what we see in our data and what we hear from our nurses is similar to what you've heard through Voice of the Travel Nurse, is that commitment to patient safety comes up consistently as a top contributor for nurses. That's how they want to feel, is that there's definitely a commitment to that in the facilities that they're in. And so I think that tops the list for many, many reasons. But if we think about what's happening in the world of healthcare and the shortage of healthcare staff, we're almost just perpetuating this problem, right? Because the more short-staffed you are, the more burnt out the people at the bedside become, which leads them to resign and exit the profession. And so, what can we do to create, if we can't create more bodies, what can we do to create a safer system? And so I think that the getting to the heart of that and educating not just nurses within the four walls of a hospital, but I think our passion for our nurses that work and allied health professionals also that work with Nomad is that we really equip them with the same tools and the same understanding of how they can voice concerns, how they can escalate them in environments that they're not as familiar with. Because knowing that the staff, many of top performing hospitals across the nation are also using these tools, they've embedded them into their culture. And so we want to make sure that our team of travel nurses and allied health professionals also have the same access to these tools, because I do think that creating a safer system is what will help us solve the problem of understaffing that exists broadly.
So as we look at, coming out of the pandemic, we were just talking before we went on live here about, what a crazy 3+ years it's been. Thankfully, we're on the other side of the pandemic. But as in your role, what were some of the things that you saw relative to clinical issues, relative to what some of the nurses were experiencing, mental health? What were some of the things that you observed over that 3-year period that may have been different than at other points in your career?
Well, I think we saw an all-time high toll on mental health.
Yeah.
I think that one wins hands down, right? And I think unfortunately, whatever side of the system you're on, what we know happens during times of pressure is that we cut corners. And if we think about those years of COVID as just this ultimate pressure pot, right? That was, you couldn't keep up with patients, you couldn't keep up with staff. And so corners were cut. And then, of course, all the requirements just for physical safety that were a part of COVID, the masking, the gloving, all of it. I also had the opportunity to work in the health system here in Texas that went through Ebola. And that was sort of our first taste 12 or 13 years ago now of what that looks like when the system gets put under pressure, and how much more we try to elevate those standards of physical safety, but we didn't necessarily pay as much attention to the emotional and the mental safety of our caregivers. And I think we chatted a little bit last week is, I have a member on my team who was only a nurse for 2 years, and her nursing journey started at the beginning of the pandemic. And we have a couple of other nurses at Nomad, and I talk to young nurses all the time that they got into the profession during that period, that 3.5 years, and we're like, I cannot do this. And that's not just in nursing. I think we saw teachers do that too.
Sure.
Their profession from a service standpoint changed so much, and the demands on them changed so much. And so I do think what we've done as a community of healthcare professionals to really elevate what it means to feel psychologically safe in a health system and in an environment where you can talk about concerns and escalate
Yeah.
and solve, right? Seek to solve together. I think, again, that's what really helps us to create the safer environment.
I'd like to focus on that a little bit, the mental health aspect. I'd like to get your perspective. Obviously it continues to be mental health issues continue to be an issue within healthcare. My sense, and I am not a clinician, but my sense is that those issues always existed, obviously exacerbated by the pandemic, but mental health issues always existed within healthcare in general, but they weren't talked about. People avoided it.
Sure.
People were perhaps stigmatized by it. They felt uncomfortable. Maybe they felt that they would lose their jobs. What do you think? Do you think that the systems and facilities are more receptive to addressing mental health issues, or people reporting mental health issues? What's your observation on that?
I do think broadly, so from a macro perspective, I think there are lots of fantastic health systems that have implemented programs, certainly to support mental health and to give nurses and, again, other healthcare professionals the opportunity to take a break and to step away. And we've normalized things like, taking a leave of absence even, or just breaks. Those, there's just there's legalities around all of that, right? Which there wasn't before. So there's laws protecting a lot of that for nurses and for other clinicians. We've also seen, maximum work hours that you can work per week, and standards set around staffing ratios, and that's new, right? That's staffing ratios broadly across the U.S. has been a slow moving train, but
Certainly has.
we're getting there, right? We're getting to a point where nurses have the opportunity to, they have a platform at least to speak from now. Safe Harbor, I remember when Safe Harbor started years and years ago, when I was, again, still doing patient safety and performance improvement work. And that, again, was an opportunity for nurses to say, this is an unsafe environment for me to work in. And so I do think that we're getting better at this. I think, again, there's some, Mayo Clinic and others have some fantastic programs to support nurses and healthcare professionals in their mental health. I think we have a long way to go. I think we promote many things around physical health and gym memberships, but are we also covering mental health services for clinicians? And I love that about Nomad. We do offer things like that to our clinicians, and we do give them access to services like that can really support them throughout their journey. I think that having someone to talk to is a critical component of this. Again, I reflect back on the data that you produce through Voice of Travel Nurse, and what does it say, right? You want to feel heard. You want to know that you're working as part of a team. And our mission and purpose around our team is that we not only are providing navigators, which we do at Nomad more broadly, but we have clinical navigators. That's my team. And these leaders can really come alongside as a fellow nurse and talk through situations. Say, yeah, I've been there. I've been there when I got my 10th patient. I've been there when the patient crashed and I couldn't do something. And we've had nurses talk other nurses through death of a patient, death of a coworker. And I do think that, again, just making that space safe and allowing clinicians the opportunity to have access to it is what's critically important for helping all of us.
Thank you for mentioning the Voice of the Travel Nurse. For those that don't know, it's a report that the Gypsy Nurse did just about a year and a half ago. It is available on our website. You can search for it on Voice of the Travel Nurse, or it's available for download off of our menu. But it's the Voice of the Travel Nurse was essentially a survey that we did around the attitudes and perceptions, specifically of travel nurses. And we had over 1,000 respondents to the survey. It was done by a market research firm that we work with. And Valerie, as you mentioned, we had some really interesting findings there, both good and bad, in terms of why people stay in nursing or stay in travel nursing, and why they may leave. But certainly some of the things that you've mentioned earlier about nurse to patient ratios, support that both facilities and agencies provide, those are all critical to not only traveler satisfaction, but also to successful outcomes, not only for patients, but also just a good outcome for agencies that are placing the travelers, as well as the travelers themselves on contract. So that was very eye-opening for us when we put that out there. And it certainly, it brought a lot of things to light in the community, certainly relative to burnout and mental health and those sorts of things that I think a couple of years ago were just being touched on.
Yeah.
I'd like to shift gears a little bit, and obviously you've talked a little bit about Nomad and what Nomad does, but I'd like you to fill our community in terms of how Nomad operates. You mentioned the Nomad navigators. Can you give an overview to our community about Nomad and what makes it different?
Sure, I'm happy to. So Nomad was actually the first healthcare staffing marketplace. We're Joint Commission accredited also. But basically our platform offers clinicians to find the job that they want. And so we have placement, over 300,000 clinicians that are registered users on the platform. Jobs are searchable across the United States. And then what our technology does is it helps to match clinicians with more precisely the jobs that they're most likely to not only get, but enjoy in the cities and the shifts and the departments that they want to work in. And then our navigators are a really unique part of our our company, we don't have recruiters because, again, this is a clinician-centric, clinician-led experience, choosing your own role, your own job. But our navigators then quickly come alongside and help clinicians navigate through that early application process and into credentialing. And the unique role that our clinical navigators play, again, is these are clinicians, and so we can walk the journey with you from a clinician to clinician perspective. And so questions you might have about floating specifically, or if you do have concerns about patient ratios, we not only provide care to them and guidance prior to assignment, so we'll help with any education remediation or extra prep if it's been a while since they may or may not have looked at lethal rhythms or something like that, and they're taking an exam, and come alongside them, provide some coaching, and help make sure they feel best prepared to get to the bedside. And then we provide that support throughout the journey. And so I know that's been the focus of what we've talked about today, but in instances where clinicians may not feel safe in an environment, they can escalate immediately to our team, and we provide them with that information on how to do that even before they start their journey. So they all receive that as part of Nomad's orientation. And so they're very aware from the very beginning what this means and how we're there to support them. And interesting with your data, again, we've looked at our own data alongside of it to see where there's correlation. And one of the things that we've learned is that even if clinicians may say they didn't have the best experience in a particular facility, because of the support they received, they still end up rating their overall experience with Nomad very high, and say they would still come back and travel because they had a support system there that still took them through that journey. So while the assignment may or may not have been exactly what they wanted it to be, I do think that the way that we're able to, augment their experience, even when it can be negative, is a really positive thing. We definitely know how valuable that is to clinicians.
Is that the aspect of support and agencies supporting, travelers while on assignment? Is that perhaps one of the, it sounds like a strange term to put it into, but is that one of the benefits perhaps that came out of the pandemic relative to travel healthcare? Is it more and more firms are realizing that they need to support the clinician throughout the contract, not just at the beginning and not just when they wrap up?
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting question. My short answer is I would like to think yes. I would like to think that yes, it did. I think one of the nuances and what makes us a little bit different is that I've often used the saying that says, once the first bomb drops, it's too late to figure out who's on your team, right? And so it's a similar scenario as we try to teach these tools and make them accessible to clinicians before they even start their assignment, because once you're in it, once you're in a challenging situation, it's a lot more difficult then to go, now, what do I do? Is there someone I have access to? So we really try to make sure that they know this up front. And again, we have a lot of success stories. I tried to cull it down. I thought maybe I'll give one or two examples, but the more my team, we keep documents of this, and the more we looked at them, it's just instance after instance, we have clinicians that may escalate or initiate what we call, a concern or escalation. And we're just able to coach them through that, again, really in a manner that says, we want you to feel safe. Here are some ways that you can navigate that at the hospital. And then if it doesn't, then we'll intercede then. And we can also engage with the client. We have some really great success stories where we've not only been able to coach the clinician, but we've been able to follow up with the client. And we've seen them really come together and actually extend assignments and be grateful that the clinician escalated concerns. And, just some really cool stories like that. And so I would like to think that we've gotten better at this, because we know that it's just going to continue to damage the health system as a whole if we don't pay attention to it. And now we're talking not just traveling healthcare professionals, but we're talking, people that are in perm positions too.
Sure.
Just have to be better at this as a larger community of healthcare providers and what we're doing to take care of each other. I think too, I was writing this down in some notes. I was just gathering my thoughts, but I think one of the reasons why this this means even more in the profession that we're in is I think about nursing and again, other allied health positions, and this is really a calling for the majority of us. And so our careers are very personal, and they're personal in a different way. We're really saving people's lives in a lot of ways, and or at least healing them or making them better. And then I think we carry our own licenses, and so our risk there also
Yes.
feels higher, right? And so when you're in a situation that you feel like is unsafe, the concern, and I'm speaking as only one caregiver, but I imagine I'm speaking for many, is the concern is not just about the patient and the patient's family, but I also have a concern for myself, because in tragic in tragic circumstances, when things really don't go the way we might want them to because things were unsafe or a decision was made in the care of a patient, I can lose that. Right, I can lose the privilege to practice, and
Yes.
so that it's a big. There's a lot at stake there. It's a very personal, high risk place for us to be, and so I think we owe it to to clinicians and to caregivers to get this part right.
Well, we've all seen reports over the last few years of nurses that unfortunately have been in difficult situations and
Yep.
been brought to court. One of them, the one that comes to mind, was the case of the nurse that worked at Vanderbilt
Mm-hmm.
University Medical Center, I believe, and there
Yep.
was a tragic outcome there. And as you mentioned, it is not only is there the professional aspect of it, the professional risk, if you will, but there's the personal risk in terms of carrying
Sure.
your own license and being held responsible in those sorts of situations. So it's very, very, very difficult situation. Um, I'd like to go back a little bit to when you were talking about escalation situations and feeling comfortable, or knowing when to escalate. Can you give some specific examples, particularly too? We in our community, the Gypsy Nurse community, we have travelers that are at all stages of their career. We have a lot of people that are very new, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe going in their first, they're new to nursing, number one, and going on their first assignment. What sort of advice or what sort of specific examples of situations can you bring up that would say, hey, this is a situation where you need to escalate? I'd love
Mm-hmm.
to hear more about that.
Sure. Well, the most common ones that we hear are patient ratios. So that one
Yeah.
comes a lot. Um, Floating requirements. So while they may have accepted that responsibility to float, they're being asked to really float outside of their scope of practice of what they feel like they can comfortably provide. Um, Interpersonal communication, so that does come up as just team dynamics, just frustrating work environment and kind of how to get along with colleagues. And so even just kind of minimizing that to those top three. There are very specific tools that have become almost common language in healthcare. And so we embed a lot of these tools actually into the way we just do business now, because they're not just great tools for escalating and talking about concerns in healthcare. They're great in your life. And so things like we use the ARC tool, which is ask for something, request, what's your concern, and then the chain of command. So that's almost like how to organize your thoughts, right? How do you really prepare for this? The SBAR process, which is something we learned in healthcare years ago, and it was really intended to be a way to increase effectual communication between bedside providers and physicians. And so we wouldn't get on the phone with them and start this big long narrative of what was wrong. We very clearly and concisely communicated what the situation was, the background of the clinician, our assessment, and our recommendation. And then CUS is the third one. And these are the three that we make clinicians aware of in their orientation. We talk about the support of the clinical navigator. We give them examples. They can watch videos to see how it plays out. So it's kind of like watching a role play. They do that as part of their orientation. So again, if you get into a situation where one of these things emerges, so say it's a patient ratio scenario, and go, oh, I remember that from my orientation, and the tool can come to mind. And then again, if you need extra support, we are literally just a phone call or a text message away. And we set up these coaching calls with clinicians all the time and can talk them through that scenario. we encourage them also to use those tools regularly, on a regular basis. And sometimes even like you can use an SBAR scenario, for example, if things aren't necessarily going south, but you can use that in good situations too,
Sure.
right? And so, but the custom, I think, for us has been really probably most widely used, and it's just incorporated into our coaching. And that's simply saying, I really need to get a supervisor's attention. I really need to escalate this into a charge nurse. I'm concerned about my patient's condition or this situation. I'm uncomfortable with what's happening, and I believe safety is at risk. And so it really, again, once you start using that language, it makes it really difficult for the person on the receiving end of it, who's probably also, again, familiar with these tools. It's kind of like those, once you know, you can't unknow it. So once you know what these tools are and you know what the language is and you hear someone begin to use those words, you're like, okay, I know what this is. And this is what we're moving through. And again, I think if anything, it's done really wonders for opening up communication and honestly empowering traveling healthcare professionals to really have a voice at the facilities. I think regardless of where you are in your career, anytime we go into an unknown environment, into a situation where we're the only person who's not really part of the permanent team, that can be an intimidating conversation. And again, elevating knowledge of this common language that exists between all healthcare professionals is a great way to sort of level that playing field, if you will, so that you're coming into the team, you're equipped with the language, you have a team of clinicians standing beside you that's going to help walk you through the situation. And again, we've just seen many instances of this where clinicians go on to extend assignments and are able to or go on and end up being permanent employees in place, because demonstrating that behavior and that commitment to patient safety is also something I'm going to speak now as a former nurse manager. I wanted to see that. I wanted to see employees that were willing to bring up when there was an issue or a challenge, and talk about what the solution could be. And so I think using these tools is a real sign of strength and should not be viewed as just somebody who's always complaining or has something wrong all the time. I think that's the piece about these tools that make it so great, is that they're really action focused. And I know we said that in the title was like, these conversations are intended to drive action. They're not just whining and complaining. This is truly, something is wrong. Safety's an issue. Let's solve for it. And so I think that also helps to improve the relationship that's on the unit.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about the unique aspects of travel healthcare. In terms of, we have a lot of people in our community that come to the Gypsy Nurse, or certainly TravCon, the Healthcare Travelers Conference that takes place every September in sunny Las Vegas. But we have a lot of people that come to our platform that are thinking about healthcare travel. Perhaps they are, again, either new to nursing or what have you, or perhaps they're further along in their career but want to give travel a try. What are some of the, pieces of advice that you would give folks that are considering travel or specifically travel nursing that you would want to pass along?
Well, I think probably, as with anything, there's going to be a certain group of people that travel won't work for. It's not going to work for everybody. I think this commitment to, or maybe not a commitment's the right word, but this ability to be flexible. I think that's probably one of the keys. I think your heart kind of has to be into change. So an ability to be nimble. I think those are skills, and again, not everybody has those skills. I even think about the difference in nurses that work in the ER versus nurses that have traditional rehab experience. Those are very different experience as a nurse or as a healthcare professional, and very different people take those roles. And so I do think there's a subset of healthcare professionals that just are driven by this desire to stay away from hospital politics, right? Not get bogged
Yes.
down in maybe
Yep.
some of the typical things that they would if they're in a facility. They like to come in, they like to deliver care, they want to know it's safe and feel part of the team, but then they're ready for the next adventure. So I think, this adventurous spirit is important, resilient, flexible, and also this willingness to really have a big impact wherever you go. And so I think that's part of our narrative, I guess, in teaching some of these skills too, is it's not just, a job. It's really, you're making a difference, right? So how can we not only make a difference in the lives of our patients, but to create just a safer structure where the next person that's coming is now going to be in that facility. It's one of the things we love to do now, and in how we share facility evaluations and how clinicians can know, other clinicians were here at this hospital before and they had a 5-star experience. I want to go there. And what can we do to sort of partner and create those cultures that are safe? And so I do think that those skills, that kind of way of thinking, is important if you're getting into travel nursing. I think people, again, that have maybe been burnt out from a traditional environment where maybe things are entrenched or they haven't seen a lot of change, it can be a nice breath of fresh air to go to different places, plus get some travel in while you go, and take that leap. I think, anyway, I'm not a prophet by any means, but I think we will start to see this group of travel professionals begin to normalize again. Because again, I don't
When
think
you
it's
say
for.
when you say normalize, what are you referring to in that regard?
So I think in those 3.5 years over the course of the pandemic, right, we saw just people pick up and go. They were just, people came out of
Yes.
retirement, or just like, I got to go. And I think people went to where the need was because there was a need. And again, going back to, we're called to this. This is what we saw, people hurting in New York, and people left Texas.
Sure.
We're like, I got to go, right? I got to go to those tents. It doesn't matter. I'm going to take care of those people. And so, but I think now, as the market begins to figure itself out, that's probably the kindest way to put it. The healthcare market just still feels kind of volatile.
Yeah.
Is, I think we'll probably return to a portion of healthcare professionals that will be sort of focused on traveling, and I just think that it won't be the same, like, just hordes of people are rushing to travel.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but it feels like that will come back to a little bit more normal levels of sort of a pool of folks that this is really a driver for them. And again, they're seeking the adventure, want to stay away from the hospital politics, want to make a big difference in a short amount of time, and are flexible and kind of resilient in their own career.
So I will go back to your future, outlook here, and being a prophet on this. But are you worried at all about the future of nursing in particular? We've all seen the reports about nurses leaving the profession, obviously, particularly after the pandemic. And there was a lot of reasons for that. But obviously, as you know better than I do, it is while it's extremely rewarding, there are also it can also be very demanding in a variety of different ways. Um, do you worry about, as you look at the future of nursing, do you worry about our ability to bring new nurses into the profession, to keep nurses in the profession? Does it cause you concern?
It does. I think when I think about the things that I worry about,
Yeah.
it is that story on the lack of healthcare professionals for physicians too, right? We see it, the
Yes.
physician population, nursing population,
Yes.
allied health population. It's just a decreasing number. And so I think I go back to my comment, or what we chatted about, I guess, a little bit earlier on, is I think we get into, other than it being a calling, we as human beings, we flock to where things are good, right? We typically pursue things that look good and that feel good, and that allow us to fulfill our calling or our desire, our goals, and things like that. And so I think recommitting as a larger macro health system to fixing a broken system is what's going to make it attractive again, right? And so I think we have to ask ourselves those questions. If we don't learn lessons, I had this conversation, I think at SIA a couple of months ago, is if we didn't learn anything from COVID, if we didn't learn how to make, say, licensure easier. Think about how easy it was to send a nurse from one side of the country to another. We removed, red tape and lines that didn't make any sense. They didn't increase harm to patients. It just made it easier to get people to the bedside so they could deliver care. That's what that was intended for. And I think there are lessons to be learned from COVID and just from years of probably not getting it quite right. I think we do have to recommit around creating a healthier system, because that's what people go to, right? People want to be part of something that isn't broken and that doesn't feel gross. And again, I think that's human behavior. And if we can begin to think about it in those terms, then I think that's fixing at the root versus trying to band-aid solutions down the line, which end up in just increasing numbers of people leaving the profession and things like that. And it's kind of like, we got to go back to, what does it take to fix it here so that people want to come back again? I wanted to be a nurse, and again, since the time I was very little, I didn't have any idea what it was like out there, right? And so I say often now, I really don't know that I could go back into that environment. It's hard, it's a hard place to be with a lot of risk. And again, there's some phenomenal health systems out there. You can walk into them and you can feel the difference. And so that's not to say that things aren't running very well at many, many places. A dear friend of mine just had a hospital stay last week with, her husband did, and said that's like nominating every nurse for a Daisy Award. So there are definitely hospitals and health systems that are doing this right. And that's exciting.
Sure.
I think we have to go even bigger than that as a macro community that says we're committed to the health of this population. And if we are, then we got to start attracting people back into the profession. How do we do that?
Well, it's there is, as I was mentioning earlier, you get people leaving the profession, so on and so forth. You hear a lot of negativity, but there are a lot of positives, not only for certainly just the profession, but also the healthcare system in general. I mean, I think while the U.S. system has its challenges, it's still a great system, and the exceptions are things not going well. I think overall, we probably hear about all the negative things, but the positive aspect is people do enjoy a great level of care across the country, and it's just there are many more positives than negatives.
Agree.
Valerie, when you were talking about early on in your career, I believe you had mentioned that you were recruited out of Canada to nurse in the U.S. Tell me a little bit about that. I'm curious. As we talk about healthcare systems and compare and contrast, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, we could have a whole other session on the difference between that.
We'll
so
be back for the longer version. I'd love to hear more about that. It's very interesting. We get a lot of people coming into the Gypsy Nurse community inquiring about how they're coming either from Canada or certainly other places in the world, and asking about how they can become travelers here. So love to get your perspective. What was your journey?
At the time, which again feels like a really long time ago, I graduated from the University of Calgary with my Bachelor of Nursing degree, and I really wanted to pursue my master's. And at the time, you couldn't go into, I wanted to get my master's in family therapy. I couldn't do that without 2 years of full-time nursing experience. I've been working as a student nurse and then as a grad nurse at a hospital, and loved all of that. But I started getting ads. The U.S. was crying for nurses even back then. So the U.S. was short of nurses 30 years ago. And nurses in Canada are all unionized. And so as a new nurse, 22 years old, I couldn't get a full-time job. I was working a lot of hours, but I was only PRN. And until you had a full-time position, those hours wouldn't count toward qualifying to get into the master's program. So I thought, well, I'll go to Texas, for a couple of years and get some experience there. And then I'll come back and do my master's. And well, you heard me say it's 30 years later, I'm still in Texas. So, that often the best laid plans go awry. But yeah, I had my daughter 2 years later. So here we are. But I think, yeah, I guess so much has changed over 30 years. And I'm grateful for the change. And to your point, we were here to talk about, well, not just that, but, the focus was, you're talking about tools we use in challenging situations. There's certainly a lot of wonderful situations. And again, wanted to reflect on one even as recent as last week. And so that's, I think, the coolest part of this conversation is that that's the goal, is at the end of all of this, it's equipping people with communication skills they can have in their tool belt that do make things better. Because the goal is that we keep them on assignment. The goal is that they stay, they have a productive journey, and they're able to take those tools into their next assignment. And I think that's, in our small way, how we're trying to heal the system. And so I think, 30 years ago, I didn't have access to those same things. You got your list of things you did that stuff, you kind of towed the line, you went home. It was that's all it was. And so I do think the improvements and the energy that we've put around really having a system that is safe and where we communicate well, respect each other, this idea of mutual respect, just an overall commitment to patient safety has really been fantastic. I've loved to be part of the journey, honestly, and again, to watch health systems across Texas is where my career's been, but certainly to see that evolve over the last 20 years has been really exciting. I think we have a lot further to go, but I do think you're right. We have a lot of the right people in place, and truly a commitment to making things better. So I think that's what's most exciting to me right now.
Well, when you talk about tools and communication, I think that certainly over the last few years, one of the bright spots about just social media in general, and obviously our ability to do this is in part based on social media, but the communication tools and bringing attention to various system-wide issues, it's with social media, it's much more conducive to that. A lot of the issues now from where we sit are coming out into the open. The Gypsy Nurse is essentially a communication platform. It's a community platform that's anchored by our website, thegypsynurse.com, as well as all of our various, social media channels. But at the end of the day, those channels and those tools bring some of these larger issues to the table. I'm sure, like yourself, I follow a lot of the nursing influencers out there, people that have been in nursing for a number of years. They're advocates for nursing or advocates for, healthcare professionals in general. And they're using these social media tools to talk about what is working perhaps, and how to do more of it, what's not working, how to bring attention to it, how to get behind it, and how to support change. So I don't know if you see the same aspect of it, but I certainly see it from where I sit. Social media has definitely, I consider it to be a tool for change in healthcare.
Absolutely agree with you. I think even what we've seen around, as to take it to celebrities, I guess, to take it to that level, but when we've seen tragedy as it relates to celebrities and suicide and all of that, you just see the outpouring of support for mental health and for what it means, and people just finding that we're normalizing that conversation, and I do think we're worlds away from where we were, and just being able to talk about it. And again, I love that the dialogue is not around talking about a problem. It's around talking about the solution. I think that's the uniqueness, even in healthcare space, is that we are trained, and we kind of have it inside of us that we want to heal and we want things to be better. And that's why we got into the profession in the first place. So I do love that I think that's at the heart of healthcare from the very beginning, is how can we make things better, safer, more reliable, not only for our patients and for their families, but for each other. So.
Tell me a little bit more. You've talked about your nursing career, and then you came to Nomad Health relatively recently. I believe it's been about a year and a half or so with Nomad. Tell me about your role there in terms of how it helps to fulfill your desire to make a difference and help people and so forth. I'd love to have you talk a little bit more about the role and what you enjoy about it.
Sure. Well, I came to Nomad. My 2-year anniversary is January the 12th. So,
Okay.
so I'm pretty excited to hit the 2-year mark. But yeah, I came to Nomad from AMN Healthcare. Actually, I was the head of credentialing at AMN. And again, went through COVID. There was some fantastic partners. And so then came to Nomad, really moving from the credentialing space primarily at AMN into the clinical space. And so for me, again, it was this opportunity to reconnect with the clinical part of my work and my spirit. And so I've really enjoyed the opportunity to handpick the folks on my team, to really bring the voice of clinicians, and not just of any clinicians, but of us as a team. Our voices are infused through the business operations of the company. So from the way we design the product to the way we distribute our surveys to how we communicate with clinicians, whether it's verbally or through text messages, we're infusing that knowledge throughout Nomad. And I love the commitment to the clinical voice. So that for me has been so rewarding over the last couple of years. I do have credentialing operations also. And so that's been a really unique opportunity also, is to just more fully infuse the love for clinicians and what this really means, and helping the credentialing organization to really connect with why we do what we do. I think in business, we can get, even if we're in the healthcare, truly healthcare staffing, but it's a business. And so I think any way that we can keep reminding the organization that this is not just a business. We are connecting people with places, and they're going to take care of people, and we're changing people's lives. And so that is what I have loved the most about my journey over the last 2 years, is just really connecting people back to the purpose. I remind my team often is like, there's a patient at the end of this, and these are people's lives we're saving, and so I think that is, the more we can do that, again, as a larger community of healthcare professionals, I think we'll be better for it, because it's meaningful work, and it's purposeful work, and I think we create better companies when we remember that, the heart of why we do what we do.
Well, and Nomad is a very unique player within healthcare and healthcare staffing. For those that are not familiar with Nomad, maybe you could give a little bit more of how the business works in that regard, and how travelers could work with Nomad if they're interested.
Sure, I'm happy to. So we say we're recruiterless, and I think sometimes people, if they're used to having a recruiter or they like that, then that's where the switch goes off. But what we like to say really quickly after that is that doesn't make us peopleless. And hopefully after this conversation, there's a better understanding of truly the support that we offer. Again, our navigator team, which comes alongside as early on in the process, really as we can, so that they can help clinicians not feel alone on the journey. And so the uniqueness of Nomad is, again, we do not have recruiters. It's intended to be a clinician-led experience where clinicians are truly selecting the roles and the positions in the cities that they want to work in, not forcing you somewhere that maybe has a better commission or those types of things, which can often play into decision making in other traditional environments. But then we try to blend those parts of maybe what's tradition, and that's feeling supported and having someone to talk to and those types of things, so that, again, it can be a successful journey overall. And so our technology is intended to really help better match more specifically clinicians with the jobs that they want. And then our team of people come alongside clinicians. And the goal is that we can then, because we don't have recruiters and that additional overhead, then we're able to, put that money back into the system. And so that means back into the clinicians' pockets. And so I think it's a great model overall. And our CEO is a physician himself. So the commitment to clinicians has always been very strong. It's at the heart of the work we do, is to remove every obstacle that stands between a clinician and the patients that they want to serve. And so I think we get to live that every day.
Well, Valerie, this has been great. We're almost out of time here. We obviously had a lot of questions for you, but some of those questions came from our audience. I was able to pull those out of
Awesome.
some of the comments that came over to us. But this has really been fantastic. And again, it's such an important topic about the clinical component and how people need support out there, and the ability to raise issues and the different tools that they can use to do that. In the last couple of minutes, any advice to whether it's travel nurses or any other travel healthcare professional or any other healthcare professional in general that's experiencing some problems, isn't sure what to do, isn't sure how to raise the issue? Any parting advice you'd like to provide to those folks?
Well, of course, I'd love to encourage them to come join us at Nomad. That would be fantastic. But if you're in the middle of something right now, I think my best advice, I made a comment the other day in a meeting, and I think it applies here also, but it was, what advice would you give to your younger self? And I think primarily for me means I would have found my voice earlier in my career. And so use your voice now. I think the clinical voice, the clinician voice, the nursing voice, allied health voice, I think those voices matter more now than they ever have before. And so I think raising it in respectful ways, again, if you're not familiar with some of these tools, they're definitely easy to find. If you search for them, you can also reach out to us, of course, if you're part of the Nomad community, and we're happy to walk people through that. But raise your voice often and come with a solution. I think that's what we need. And I think it has to be a commitment to each one of us to not only find the problems that exist, but to also bring solutions so that we can heal it together.
That's a great note to end on. Great advice. Valerie Gale, VP of Clinical Excellence for Nomad Health. Thank you very much for taking time out of what I know is a very busy schedule to join us here on the Gypsy Nurse Live. We would love to have you back again at some point to talk about other issues facing travelers. So again, thank you for your time. I'm going to ask that Rachel come back in and help us to wrap it up. Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. That was such a great conversation. So much great information for everyone to soak in and apply to their life. So thank you so much, Valerie, for coming on here. And thank you, Steve, for helping co-host and ask all those questions. So
always great when you've got a great guest like Valerie. So it makes it easy when you get a great guest like Valerie.
Well, thank you both. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you, everyone. Don't forget to get your TravCon tickets before the end of the year, before those prices go up. And have everyone have happy holidays, and we'll see you next year.